All right, I'm here for 9.2, the impacts of humans on the ocean. This is our last lesson of the year. My last video for our lessons of the year too. Pretty excited, I'll be honest. Love you guys, but I'll be happy to be done doing all of this. So for 9.2 impacts of humans, we've got several things that we're going to look at, a number of different impacts happening through human activity. Unfortunately, it's lots of negative stuff today. There are some positive things that humans are doing too, all of which are in response to problems that we've created. And so, that kind of seems to be how it works. We create the problem and then we try to react to it. And unfortunately, in a number of different areas, we're not doing a great job yet of reacting to some of these problems. So let's go ahead and take a look at this. It's a fairly short lesson today. I'm going to try to buzz through it here. The first box that we have is habitat destruction. Most habitat destruction occurs close to the shore and is the direct result of human development. So poor planning, that kind of thing that doesn't take into account marine ecosystems as they build up in an area and ends up destroying part of that ecosystem. We won't talk too much in depth about this because we have already, but the impact of humans on coral reefs. Approximately about a quarter, 1/4 of all coral reefs have already been lost or are at risk. At this point, I would say all of it is at risk, depending on what your definition of at risk is. But just lots of issues from rising temperatures and ocean acidification, places around the world where fishing is done with explosives. Most places this is now illegal, but it's very hard to catch people who are doing this illegally, and so there's still a lot of it happening. And then collection of it for the aquarium trade, same thing, illegal pretty much just about everywhere around the world, but still lots of it happening kind of under the table. All right, again, we've talked about this, so we'll just mention it briefly. Outbreaks of coral bleaching worldwide indicates that coral reefs are under stress. This bleaching is a bad thing. It's when the coral expel the algae, there's those xanthilli, it causes a white patch to form within the colony. Sometimes that white will take over the whole colony, depending on how stressed the coral in that area get, and it ultimately leads to the death of that coral. You see some bleached coral here. Trawling and some other fishing techniques as well, but especially trawling. These nets are a major threat, especially to subtidal habitats. This is where large nets are dragged across the bottom. When that happens, it stirs up the sediment, which can block light. It messes with the different habitats and the ecosystem at the bottom. It destroys all kinds of stuff. And then it also, anything that is attached there at the bottom to a substrate, when that comes through and drags and detaches these creatures that are meant to be sessile, that are meant to be attached to something. So there's all kinds of things that, those trawling nets just tear through the bottom. Not a good thing. Marine pollution, nothing that you're writing here, but obviously just be aware. The introduction of substances, heat, energy, sound, anything that's going to reduce the quality within that environment. We also have concerns with fertilizers, sewage, oil, toxic substances. We're going to take a look at a couple of those. Fertilizers are one that we've mentioned briefly throughout our class before. These are land-based fertilizers, things that we're putting in our grass for the Great American Lawn or for crop yields. These fertilizers that we're using on land, it washes into our rivers, carries off into the ocean, and what it does is increase the nutrients in the water. Well, that sounds like a good thing, right? We're using fertilizers on land because they help. Well, they help in the water too. Unfortunately, they help things that we don't necessarily want to help. Things like algae, and sometimes sea grasses and sea weeds that are then able to take over an area. For example, near a coral reef, the seagrass may be able to better compete for that space, and the coral won't be able to keep up because we're overfeeding and over giving these nutrients to the seagrasses. Algae blooms are a huge issue. All kinds of places, not just in the ocean, but in river and lake systems as well, where the algae population just explodes, and with that layer across the top, it eliminates the ability of light to get through, and just causes all kinds of problems for fish and plants, for everything that lives in that ecosystem. So feeding these things, it sounds good at first. Oh, nutrients, that's great. But it's just nutrients that we don't want there because it offsets the balance of that ecosystem. Sewage can be a problem. Domestic sewage is going to be coming from homes as well as from city buildings and stormwater runoff. Those are considered domestic sources. And then you have industrial sources that are going to be coming from factories, that kind of thing. Sewage can contain disease-causing organisms. We're talking about fecal matter. There's lots of bacteria and all kinds of E. coli and Salmonella and all kinds of many other things too that can be harmful. Oil pollution is a huge one. Organisms can accumulate the components of oil. I mean, the toxins within the oil can kind of build up within the body of the organism. And when it does, it can affect all kinds of things: reproduction, growth, development, behavior, all kinds of stuff gets negatively impacted by these toxins that are soaked into the body through oil. The organisms may die off, or for some organisms, their fur or feathers become coated with this oil, and in major instances where you have massive oil pollution like oil spills. Organisms living in estuaries, seagrass meadows, mangrove forests, and corals, they're all at great risk. Everything that is in these areas are at great risk if they get coated by oil. We'll see in our documentary that we'll watch later in the week what a negative effect things like some of the massive oil spills that have happened over the last 50 or 100 years. Just lots and lots of negative effects that come from this oil pollution. Image there of a sea turtle taken from an area where there had been an oil spill. We'll just note real quick here some of the sources of oil pollution. You have tanker accidents that can cause it. Just the normal operation of tankers will put out some. River runoff, some of it coming from other sources. Refineries will put off some as well. Typically what we think of is these blowouts and accidents that happen from offshore oil rigs. But tankers can be a major, there are a number of different sources, as well as some natural seeps that can occur too. We're pulling the oil from the ground, and so it is possible sometimes for some of it to come up on its own. Recreational boating as well. There's lots and lots of sources. The two big ones tend to be tanker accidents and blowouts at the places of extraction. That's where you're going to lead to a scene like this, where you've got something just covered in oil. Keep on going here. I just want to get to where we're writing. All right, threatened and endangered species, down to our last box here. So threatened is when the number of individuals within that species, it's getting low. It's at the risk of becoming endangered, but it's not yet. And then when you get to be an endangered species, this is a species that is in immediate danger of extinction. Whatever it is that is lowering those numbers, it's enough of a problem that intervention has to take place now. Conservation has to take place right now. Or within a matter of years, we are likely going to see this animal no longer exist on the planet. So neither of these things is a good thing. Threatened is they might become endangered, endangered is they might become extinct. Some examples of marine species that are in some trouble. We've mentioned all of these, I think, at some point before. Whales due to overfishing, sharks due to overfishing, sea turtles that are being used for food and for shells. A lot of reef building corals are in jeopardy. A number of different types of benthos like giant clams. Because of human interaction one way or another, mostly human harvesting these things, but sometimes because of pollution and climate change and that kind of thing, like with coral, that's a large impact there for them. So lots and lots of problems that we are putting into place within our marine ecosystems, and it is causing stress to a number of different species throughout the ocean. A couple of different things that can or are being done. Keeping development at sustainable levels, right? Being aware of where we're building and how we're doing it in a way that's not going to destroy ecosystems. Having marine protected areas and reserves, something we're still working on to do a better job of. Habitat restoration, again, something that we are starting to do but still figuring out. And artificial reefs as well, as a lot of our coral reefs are disappearing. All the species that exist around those, are there some ways that we can artificially mimic this same kind of ecosystem and help some of those species that live around a coral reef to continue to be able to exist? It's not a perfect answer, but it's helpful in the meantime while we figure out how to restore our coral reefs. So a number of different things that we're working on a whole lot more that needs to be done. Just a couple of pictures here to finish us off. Planting some giant kelp in the areas where those are in danger and are an essential part of the ecosystem, trying to replant things like that. And then here's a couple of examples of what artificial reefs might look like that allow some of these fish to be able to live within that ecosystem still, even if the coral population is not what it should be. There you have it, 8.2. There's so much more we could talk about here. Each one of those topics probably should have been their own lesson, but we're cramming lots of information into one. Suffice it to say, we have our work cut out for us. We have created many problems within the ocean, and we need to actively be looking at what we, as a country, what we can do, as a human population, what we can do, but also as individuals. We can't just collectively put it on everyone else. We have to each be willing to individually do our own little part. So be thinking about what that looks like for you in terms of reducing plastic, lowering your carbon footprint, or what are the things that you can do to be helping to make a positive impact on all of our environments, but especially on our marine environments, and not continue the cycle of this negative human impact. Start thinking about it. Peace.